Welcome to this week's vlog. This is a compilation of little thoughts and vignettes about specific teachers. At the end of Teacher Appreciation Week, I've had some time or throughout the week, to sit down and just write some notes and record some thoughts about teachers. The first one is my senior year or junior year, I can't remember at this point in time, seminary teacher or religious class teacher, which ended up being my dad. So that's the first one. The second vignette of short stories is some elementary teachers and lessons I learned from elementary teachers. And then the third one is after that, high school, college, and beyond. So short little vignettes about teachers and what they do for us. Hi, so this week's vlog is about the teachers that have changed me and created me, I guess is the way to do it. So the first one I want to talk about is when I was a senior or a junior, I should remember, but I was able to have my dad as a teacher. It was for a religious class in Utah. There's religious classes connected with the high school, so it was a religious class. And it gave me the opportunity to see my dad in a different light than I'd ever seen him before. It was interesting to hear all my friends and everybody talk about how such an amazing teacher he was. But then to get home and have him be my dad, and he's the one that's grounding me or yelling at me or getting upset with me and issuing consequences, and I just didn't see it until I was able to walk in his classroom and just be like totally engaged and totally enthralled in the lessons that he was doing, in the activities that we were doing, in the way that he was making me or helping me see the world, and specifically tied to my religious beliefs and what that looked like on a daily basis. And obviously my entire life as a teacher, right? There's that picture right up here, this wood picture, if I could focus on that when I became an administrator, he gave to me. And it's, you know, an allegory or a metaphor for all the different types and shapes of wood and rocks and different things like that, and the metaphor is the kids, right? Kids come in all different shapes and sizes, and it's my job as administrator to love all of them and maybe help curb some of those round or sharp edges so that they're a little bit more smooth, but also to help all of them realize that they're part of a bigger, grand picture, which is our society, to help them be successful in society, whether they graduate from high school, whether they end up in making choices that they shouldn't. But so that's teacher one, which is my dad. He will probably watch this, but he definitely changed me as a teacher. So from a philosophical standpoint, right, teaching is the art of teach, or to teach, right, from an authority figure, somebody that does that as their job. But as we know, we can learn things from everybody. We can learn things from students. We can learn things from teachers. We can learn things from inanimate objects like hammers. We can learn patience or how to control our temper. Love it. Love my neighbors. Have 3 motorbikes. It's awesome. Sometimes this is at 11 o'clock at night. Anyway, that's the life of recording, right? Is dealing with some of that stuff. So we'll see if I can edit it out. But we can learn patience, right, through weather. When it's snowing, we have to drive a little bit slower. We can learn about anger management when we hit ourselves with a hammer or a nail or stub our toe on something. So we can always be learning, and we can learn from everybody. So instead of sharing 3 different stories about my elementary teachers, I'm just going to roll them all kind of into one. My first big memory was 3rd grade. Mrs. Henderson. She taught me that second is actually okay sometimes. I know, as dumb as it sounds, we used to play this game around the world with times tables and to learn our math facts, and you would sit next to the person next to you and she would flip over a card, a times table, and it was anywhere from 1 to 12, and you would then answer, and if you beat that person you would go to the next seat, and you would go to the next seat. And for months I remember I could get around the whole class, but there was one student that I couldn't beat, Mary Ann Hopkins. And I remember losing to her. We did it almost every Friday, right? Is losing to her week after week after week after week, and it was like her and I, and we never went back and forth because she would always beat me, and then she'd go through the rest of the class and then beat me again. But I remember Mrs. Henderson pulling me aside and she said, you know what, you're okay, right? The rest of your life you're going to need to understand that people will always be better. You're going to run into somebody that's better. It just so happens that Mary Ann Hopkins is in your class this year. If she wasn't in your class, then you'd be first and somebody else would be second, but you're always going to run into somebody that's a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit smarter, a little bit more, beautiful or talented or skilled or whatever. So to keep the drive alive. 5th grade, Mr. Barr. It's funny because this lesson becomes more and more apparent and understandable the older I get. Is there was a kid in our class named Mike, and Mike was kind of a jerk. He was a bully, right? That's what you would label a bully. And he had all the traditional attributes of a bully. He was bigger than everybody else. He used his height and weight to move everybody around physically, and then he would intimidate people with his language and different things like that. But I remember Mr. Barr, who is now a professor at Brigham Young University, is a PhD, and he works down there. He made Mike a leader in the classroom, and it was really upsetting at the time. I remember thinking about it, and it really came down to Foursquare. Like, that was our big thing in 5th grade, was Foursquare. And he made Mike one of the leaders in the Foursquare. And at the time, it made me mad. Because, like, why would you make this kid who doesn't do what he's supposed to and gets in trouble and stuff like that the leader in our classroom? And as I got older and got into education and started working with kids and working with people, Mr. Barr was a genius, right? And right, if you're a teacher, you know exactly what he was doing. But at the time, I didn't. As a 9, 10, 11-year-old kid, I had no idea what he was doing. But he was giving Mike some responsibility, and he was letting Mike know that he cared about him, and so that he could get him to do the things that he needed to do and to show him that he loved him. And I'm assuming, right, that Mr. Barr knew more to the story than I did as an 11-year-old kid. But at the time, I was frustrated. But now that I look back, like, we all do that as teachers, right? We find the kid that we need on our side, and usually maybe they're a little rough around the edges, or they don't have the best home life, or different things like that, and we try and get them on our side. I know I do it to this day, right? As an adult, I'm like, I'd rather have this student know that I care about them than suspend them or do these other things like that. So we work really, really hard to get those kids to show them that we love them. And it was brilliant, right? It's a lesson that I've learned over and over and over again multiple times, is that sometimes we need to love the people that need the love the most. Not to say that I didn't have any good teachers in junior high. I did have some good teachers in junior high, but it's just a funky stage. I mean, I loved middle school, but it was a funky stage, and I remember getting in trouble more than I do teachers, actually all the way through high school, if we're being honest. I was not the best student. I almost did not graduate from high school to prove a point, which sounds super ridiculous. That's for another time and another day, but it literally came down to the last day that everything was due, and I had to write a paper in order to graduate. Just horrible. It was on Lagoon Day, and if you're from Utah, you know what Lagoon is. If you're from out of Utah, it's an amusement park in Utah that everybody goes to on senior day or in 9th grade. But so the next teacher that really, really kind of opened my eyes was in college, Professor Laurie Wood at Utah Valley University. She's a professor there. I had her for my English 2010 class, and the idea really was truth with a capital T. I remember her from day one, and I have a friend that was in my class. She just challenged everything, philosophically, religious, like your beliefs, your morals. And it wasn't that she did it in a mean, like condescending way. She just challenged everything. And the things that I learned from her are things that I probably should have learned from my parents about the idea of truth with a capital T. And I remember the idea that I share with this is that Plato's at the cave of the allegory of the cave, right, is that at that moment in time I was probably one of the people that was chained up looking at what I thought was complete truth, right, the shadows on the wall. But not only did she unlock the chains, if you remember the allegory, she taught me how to understand and how to be accepting of all people. In the allegory, right, the people get unchained and they go out and see the truth and they can't handle it, so they go back in the cave and they kind of hide, and you see that a lot sometimes. But with her, it wasn't that way, right? She led you out of the cave and she would explain things to you, right? And And so I didn't have this moral or philosophical change at that time, but I learned to be much more open and accepting of other people's views, other people's beliefs, other people's religions, other people's lifestyle. And it's made me a better person, right? I mean, especially now that I work in education, we have kids come in from all walks of life, and we have kids that are trying to figure out who they are and making decisions on who they are and the kind of life that they want to live. And as an adult now, I've been able to kind of grow up, and a lot of that goes back to Lori Wood when she challenged what I thought was the truth with a capital T. Is I remember that exact statement, right? There is no truth with a capital T. Anyway, so there was that. Since that time, I've had many professors and teachers that have influenced me, right? I mean, as an administrator, I get to see 45 to 50 teachers a year and observe them in their classrooms and seeing all the things that they do to help kids and what they're willing to do to help kids. And even more so now during this time, what teachers have been willing to do has just been over the top phenomenal, right? I mean, they're basically, sorry, there's a bee flying around, you can probably see it in the camera, I mean, they're working 12, 14 hours a day, and they're always on call, answering emails, sending text messages, and different things like that. I think not allergic, I just don't want to get stung on camera, that would be kind of crazy. I think the last great teacher that we have is life itself. There are those of us that we learn really well from other people's mistakes or other people's choices, and then there are those of us that, for whatever reason, we've got to find out our own way, and we've got to be like, you know what, that stove is hot, he said it was hot, but I need to touch it to make sure it was hot. And sometimes people look down on people like that, and I think I'm one of those people. Sometimes I make mistakes just because I want to know what it feels like, and I want to see, like in my own life, how I can change and how I can be better. It has a deeper root in who I am as a person. And you know, so when we look at the teachers and Teacher Appreciation Week, we have the traditional teachers, we have life itself. We have all these things together, but if you're here and you're watching, it's probably because you're connected with education or you know me, and I just want to tell you that I love you, I appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're here.